Call Committee on Transportation Infrastructure to order pursuant to Committee Rule 6F, House Rule 11-2H4. The Chair may postpone further proceedings today on any question approving any measure or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote of yeas and nays are ordered. And without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Today, the committee will consider H.R. 6865, Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2022, H-Con Res 74, authorizing the use of Capitol grounds for National Peace Officers Memorial Service and National Honor Guard and Pipe Band Exhibition. As a reminder, for those of you who are remote, I hear inadvertent background noise, I'll yell at you. Insert a document into the record. Please have your staff email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. And finally, all bill and amendment text has been distributed electronically in accordance with the rules. H.R. 6865, Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2022 is the first item of business for today. Without objection, the Subcommittee Coast Guard Maritime Transportation discharged from further consideration of H.R. 6865, and I call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize myself for a statement on H.R. 6865. I'm pleased to call up and speak in support of H.R. 6865, the Coast Guard Reauthorization Act of 2022. This is bipartisan legislation to reauthorize funding for the Coast Guard for fiscal years 22 and 23 and to address other important issues affecting the maritime industry. The bill under consideration today is a result of productive and bipartisan negotiations with Ranking Member Graves, Chair Carbohydrate, and Ranking Member Gibbs. I'm glad that they have all joined as original co-sponsors of this important legislation. All of their thoughtful contributions have been included and have improved the bill and are much appreciated. In fact, we've worked extensively to include in this legislation several bills introduced by members of the committee from both sides of the aisle, and I want to thank them as well for their contributions. As we all know, the Coast Guard continues to suffer from insufficient funding. In recent years, this has resulted in a $3 billion shoreside infrastructure backlog, a lack of ice-breaking capability in the Arctic and the Great Lakes, as well as reduced capacity across several essential missions such as maritime safety, search, and rescue. The legislation marking up today works to address those deficiencies. I'm pleased to note it provides more than $12 billion for the Coast Guard for fiscal year 2022 and $13 billion for fiscal year 2023. These authorized funding levels track increased appropriations over the past 2 fiscal years and the highest authorized funding levels for the Coast Guard in recent memory. The budgetary increases should ensure the service has resources needed to take care of its service members and augment the capability to operate new assets such as the polar security cutters, offshore patrol cutters expected to come online in coming years. I'm particularly pleased that we've increased authorization for procurement, construction, and improvement account to $3.3 and $3.48 billion for 2022 and 23 respectively. This level of funding should enable the Coast Guard to maintain its ongoing recapitalization programs, including making progress on building new polar security cutters, addressing $3 billion backlog in shoreside infrastructure, and deferred maintenance. Last Congress, the committee passed into law substantial safety measures for large and small passenger vessels. This legislation builds upon that work by increasing safety for fishing vessels, amphibious passenger vessels. H.R. 6865 also improves oil spill response and prevention by bolstering vessel response plans, ensuring underwater pipeline safety by requiring that vessels that anchor utilize monitoring systems to maintain their location, prevent drift. And H.R. 6865 includes vital protections for mariners to address a disturbing culture within the industry where seafarers are subjected to an environment rife with cases of sexual harassment, sexual assault. Every person deserves to feel safe in their profession, whether on land or at sea. In October, a midshipman was brave enough to come forward and share the trauma she lived through during her sea year as a student at the United States Merchant Marine Academy. Her bravery has sparked a tidal wave of change for the Academy and for the industry at large. But there is more to do. Not only is it our responsibility to help protect students fulfilling their CU requirements, also our responsibility to help ensure a safe working environment for all mariners out at sea. HR 6865 includes language which will give the Coast Guard more leverage to investigate, remove predators who perpetuate a culture of sexual harassment and assault, requires companies to report incidents to the Coast Guard, ensure proper investigation takes place. It also includes important safety measures such as surveillance, master key control systems, and extends the statute of limitations for cases of sexual assault and harassment. This groundbreaking legislation is just one step in bringing justice to these victims and getting predators out of the industry. In closing, let me once again thank Ranking Member Graves, as well as Coast Guard Subcommittee Chair Carbohydrate, Ranking Member Gibbs for cooperation, drafting legislation. Look forward to continued collaboration as we move this legislation forward. I now recognize Ranking Member Graves for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to thank you and Subcommittee Carbohydrate, Subcommittee Chair Carbohydrate, and Subcommittee Ranking Member Gibbs for obviously working in a very bipartisan way and coming to a great agreement. Given the ongoing Russian assault on Ukraine, we do need to ensure that all of our armed forces, including the Coast Guard, are prepared and have the assets that they need to carry out their vital mission. The Coast Guard is both national defense responsibilities, but more important to us on the committee, they have port security, commercial vessel safety, and many security oversight missions, which are of particular importance during this time of heightened international conflict. The Coast Guard also keeps maritime commerce moving, even when other parts of the supply chain are bogged down. Overall, the bipartisan Coast Guard bill will provide the resources to help them more effectively carry out their vital missions of ensuring maritime safety, stopping the flow of illegal drugs and migrants into the country, and enforcing U.S. laws at sea, and also protecting our nation's maritime borders. In order to carry out tens of thousands of operations each year, the Coast Guard must replace and modernize their assets, from cutters to shoreside infrastructure and IT recapitalization. This bill is going to help them do that. Specifically, this legislation authorizes the purchase of a 12th national security cutter, as well as 6 additional FRCs, or fast response cutters, to ensure our Coast Guard is prepared for its current and future role to secure America. I'm pleased to be a co-sponsor of this bill, and I would urge support, and with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize now Subcommittee Chair Carvajal for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to express my support for HR 6865, which is an inclusive and bipartisan agreement to reauthorize, enhance, and support the critical missions of the U.S. Coast Guard. I am grateful for the leadership of Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and Ranking Member Gibbs for helping us craft this bipartisan agreement that will help save lives, protect our maritime environment, and support our coasties. Day in and day out, the Coast Guard continues to illustrate its resourcefulness. Coasties regularly operate at the juncture of safety and national security, law enforcement, transportation, and environmental protection. They have time and time again demonstrated their willingness to respond during times of crisis. These women and men are resourceful, but they need our support in return. The increased authorization in today's bill signals our confidence in the excellence of the Coast Guard and starts down the road to providing the resources needed to successfully complete each of the service's diverse missions. As chairman of the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee, I am proud that this bill also includes my legislation that will provide fair recourse opportunities for victims and their families against owners of small passenger vessels found to be liable for a maritime accident. This is in response to the Conception boat fire, one of the worst maritime disasters in recent history. On September 2nd, 2019, 34 lives were lost on the Conception, which was a small dive boat operating off the coast of California in my district. In the case of the Conception, the victims' families were unfairly limited in their recovery options due to an archaic maritime law that dates back to 1851. In addition, this bill provides for enhanced safety and ensures appropriate recourse for people on small passenger vessels. It encourages the Coast Guard to ensure that vessels are equipped with the best technology, equipment, and practicing appropriate procedures to prevent disaster. This bill ensures families are afforded justice and bad actors in the maritime industry are held accountable. With this bill, we can ensure the Coast Guard has the resources it needs to respond to emergencies on the water. We can also ensure that merchant mariners who have already chosen to work in a demanding profession in support of national security work in a cultural environment that shows no tolerance for sexual harassment and sexual assault. And that we continue to promote diversity within the U.S. Coast Guard to ensure it is reflective of our nation. Our diversity is our strength. I am proud to have worked with Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and Ranking Member Gibbs on this important legislation, and I look forward to ensuring that it becomes law.
I thank the gentleman. Now I recognize Ranking Member Gibbs for his statement.
Thank you, Chairman DeFazio. H.R. 6865, the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2022, represents this committee's commitment to the men and women serving in the Coast Guard and lays the groundwork for maintaining the service's mission capability in the future. The Coast Guard is one of 6 United States Armed Forces. As we watch the Ukraine crisis unfold, we should especially be aware of the need to provide our armed forces with the resources they need. Both sides of the aisle work together to craft today's piece of legislation, which recognizes the port and coastal security, drug interdiction, and maritime safety are important issues to our nation rather than just Republicans or Democrat issues. This Coast Guard authorization bill addresses priorities important to both the East and West Coast, the inland river system, and the Great Lakes. The Coast Guard plays an important and unique role in the national security and maritime safety. The service is a critical component in carrying out drug interdiction efforts, keeping our ports and coasts safe, and conducting ice-breaking operations. H.R. 6865 helps the Coast Guard better perform their missions and encourages the use of cutting-edge technology to improve operations, while also addressing ongoing issues, like how to bring the service's crumbling IT infrastructure into the modern era. Despite the administration's failure to seek appropriate capital funding levels, this bill authorizes over $9 billion for operations and the support account and $3 billion for the procurement, construction, and improvement account for FY22, and provides a 5% increase for FY23. We had hoped that this would offset earlier budget shortfalls, but given the rise in inflation, it will need it just to stay even. $585 million from the PC&I account will be used to address the crumbling shoreside infrastructure, which sets aside for the Coast Guard's yard and Cape May recapitalization. In addition, this bill includes a set aside of $350 million per year to address the growing shoreside infrastructure deferred maintenance backlog. As others have noted, this legislation authorizes the purchase of the 12th National Security Cutter and 6 fast response cutters, which are necessary for the Coast Guard's future mission capabilities. Vital to my district, I'm also proud of the commitment made into the Great Lakes in this bill. Working with my colleague, Mr. Gallagher of Wisconsin, we emphasize the economic importance of the Great Lakes and the necessity for a new dedicated icebreaker on the lakes to keep commerce moving. Thank you to Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Sam Graves, and Subcommittee Chair Carbohydrate for working in a bipartisan fashion to give the Coast Guard the resources it needs to accomplish its missions. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman now recognize Representative Carson for 5 minutes. Okay, all right. Representative Steele. Representative Steele? Okay, do other members wish to make opening statements? Oh.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Steele?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, DeFazio, and Ranking Member Graves. I speak in support of Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2022. This bipartisan legislation is vital to protecting our national security and alleviating one of the root causes of our ongoing economic crisis. Within this bill is bipartisan legislation I have been leading to address the unprecedented port backlog in California, and that is now being felt as port nationwide. Together, the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles move 40% of all shipping containers entering the US. And the backlog at these ports have been a major factor in a supply chain crisis. In the fall, I toured the port of Long Beach. I met the port chief, Wart Finger, and we discussed solutions for easing congestion, safety concerns, and major environmental impacts of idling ships. This backlog has gone on for far too long, and Orange County families are tired of seeing idling ships off their coastline while they struggle to pay their bills and find the goods they need to feed their families and run their households. American families need us to ease this backlog now and provide relief from the skyrocketing cost of groceries and goods. California farmers and their counterparts across the country are struggling to get their products to market around the world. With the Coast Guard Authorization Act, this task force has a powerful tool to give them the support they need. I stand ready to hear the recommendations of this task force and the Congress to implement solutions to address delays within the ports and their plan to address the safety concerns created by ongoing idling of waiting ships off the coast of Orange County. I am proud to support Coast Guard Authorization Act. We must act quickly to address this urgent and ongoing problem. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Representative Carson.
Thank you, Chairman. I commend your leadership and your collaboration on this Coast Guard bill with Ranking Member Graves and Coast Guard Subcommittee Chair Carvajal and Ranking Member Gibbs. I'm pleased to join our committee's leadership in supporting the Coast Guard Reauthorization Act because it will increase maritime safety and efficiency. Chairman DeFazio, I'm especially grateful to you, sir, for working with me over several years, quite frankly, to develop language that will address the persistent problems with unsafe vessels and including my Duck Safety Improvement Act in today's Coast Guard reauthorization. My duck boat safety requirements in Title III, Section 305 will finally implement safety regulations for amphibious passenger vehicles, particularly those known as duck boats. Now, these safety recommendations were made by federal agencies to address repeated problems associated with duck boats that have resulted in far too many injuries and fatalities that may have been prevented. I became more aware of these problems when my constituents in Indianapolis, the Coleman family, were involved in a horrible duck boat accident on July 19th, 2018 in Branson, Missouri. Tia Coleman was one of only 2 survivors from her family of 11, losing her husband, Glenn, and her children, Reese, who was 9 years old, Evan, who was 7, and Aria, who was 1 year old. Tia's 13-year-old nephew, Donovan Coleman, was the other surviving family member, losing his mom, Angela, his younger brother, Maxwell, was 2, his uncles, Irving and Butch, and other relatives, as well as his aunt, Belinda. You know, boarding a duck boat on Table Rock Lake started out as a fun outing for family members, but it turned into an unspeakable tragedy when the boat capsized and sank. 17 of the 31 passengers on board were killed. NTSB and U.S. Coast Guard have separately investigated the incident, and the last few aspects of the investigation should be completed soon. But I want to thank you for your hard work and the committee's hard work on this issue, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and that was a horrible tragedy. I thank him for his work to prevent future similar tragedies. Do other members wish to be recognized for an opening statement? Hearing none, we'll move to consideration of amendments to H.R. 6865. Before doing so, I'd like to note all the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. For the convenience of members and staff on both sides of the aisle will be considering amendments in the order listed on the roster provided to your office electronically. With that in mind, I have manager's amendment desk. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Manager's Amendment 036 offered by Mr. DeFazio.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. I now recognize myself for a brief statement. Pleased to offer a non-controversial manager's amendment to this bill. Bipartisan amendment has been worked out in consultation with the minority, and I urge members from both sides to support it. In addition to technical fixes to the original bill, this amendment includes many amendments offered by both majority and minority members of this committee. Among others, the manager's amendment includes provisions to require the Coast Guard to report on the enforcement of the Jones Act, ban Russian vessels from the territorial waters of the United States, require fishing vessels to be equipped with automatic identification systems to address illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. I thank my colleagues on both sides for their proposals and for agreeing to have them included in a manager's amendment. In all, it is an amendment that improves the bill. I once again want to thank Ranking Member Graves as well as Coast Guard Subcommittee Chair Carvajal, Ranking Member Gibbs for their cooperation in this amendment. I urge all members to support the amendment and to support the underlying bill. Do other members wish to speak to the manager's amendment? Mr. Young?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to compliment the chair of the committee, subcommittee, yourself, and of course the ranking member and the staff. John Rayfield and Kevin Swanson on my side have worked hard on this legislation. And just for the record, I voted on 20 Coast Guard authorization bills in my career. I've served in the Coast Guard Committee for 46 years. This is a good bill. Well, it's really very needed. By the way, I was here when we authorized the building of 3 icebreakers, and now they're wore out. That worries me. But we're going to get some new ones, hopefully. But I'm pleased with the action of this committee and the chairman and the people involved because of when I first started on these committees, there was a lack of funding for the Coast Guard, yet giving them more responsibilities. And now you've stopped us pretty much. We have to continue to push the Appropriation Committee and make sure we get our money for it. There's a lot of good provisions in here for Alaska. I will admit that right up front. You did a good job recognizing we have the largest Coast Guard involvement. We're close to the Arctic. We're close to the international scene right now. And the Coast Guard probably plays a bigger, major role in the military activity, although some people say they're not military, than any of the agencies that we have service, Army, Navy, Marines, et cetera. So I'm proud of this legislation. Do thank you for people working together, consulting and working, and this is a bipartisan bill, and I urge the passage of legislation. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. He outlasted the icebreakers, and perhaps will be on the committee for the christening of the new icebreaker. And maybe see that one into retirement too, Don. Who knows? You keep going.
By the time the next icebreakers come out, they'll all be driven by atomic power or something. So, okay. Anyway, thank you.
With that, I recognize Ranking Member Graves for any statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The manager's amendment incorporates the provisions that were offered by both sides of the aisle, and it truly demonstrates the committee's bipartisan approach, especially when it comes to authorizing programs and policies related to the National Coast Guard. This amendment does incorporate the provision from the Dean of the House, Mr. Young, which he just spoke on, and allows the nation to keep Russian vessels from entering U.S. waters during the Ukrainian crisis. With all that's going on, it's certainly a top priority, at least top of the mind these days, to keep Americans safe. It does also require the Coast Guard to submit a report to Congress on the enforcement of the Jones Act following an amendment enacted in 2020 clarifying the application of the Act on all energy activities on the Outer Continental Shelf. I do want to again thank Chairman DeFazio for his work on this package, and I'd urge support of the manager's amendment and yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and thank him for his work on the bill. Representative Huffman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Graves. A lot of good work has gone into this bill, and I'm grateful, especially for incorporating Congressman Garrett Graves in my amendment, expanding the use of a very important tool in promoting transparency at sea. These are devices called Automatic Identification Systems, or AIS. And what this does is it shares the location of vessels so that we know where fishing is occurring, and we can identify patterns that indicate illegal activity. It's a tool that will give the Coast Guard more efficiency in combating illegal fishing activities and better allow our country to leverage foreign actors to address something that's a real problem, IUU fishing, or illegal, unreported, and unauthorized fishing. Here in America, of course, we have some of the most sustainable fisheries in the world, but illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is a serious rampant problem internationally. And people may not realize this, but we're the top importer of seafood in the world. So this is our problem. Unfortunately, because of gaps in current policies, the U.S. is importing seafood that was caught by way of these illicit practices. And should go without saying that our country and our consumers should in no way, shape, or form be financing things like forced labor and slavery and other terrible practices on the high seas. And to make matters worse, we know that these practices are essentially cost-cutting measures for these foreign fleets, and that makes it more difficult for American fishermen to play by the rules and also be competitive in the global marketplace. So this provision expands requirements to U.S. vessels that currently have AIS to use them in more areas, the navigable waters of the U.S. and our EEZ. And it creates a grant program for vessels that are 50 feet or larger to obtain these devices as an incentive to increase transparency. This is a provision that goes a long way toward increasing the transparency of our own fisheries, and that's necessary for us to work towards requiring the same for importers who so often are the perpetrators of illegal fishing and other crimes at sea. So I want to thank my colleague, Congressman Garrett Graves, for partnering with me on this important work. And again, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, for your support. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Representative Graves of Louisiana for 5 minutes on the
Thank you, Mr.
Manager's Amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just want to quickly echo the comments of Congressman Huffman. It's not often I can say I agree with everything he just said, and so I want to take advantage of that.
Without objection.
Seriously, Congressman Huffman and I have bipartisan legislation related to illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing. We've taken a component of that bipartisan bill, and it is included in the Manager's Amendment, and I think it's complementary to what Mr. Young is doing. Mr. Chairman, our EEZ in the United States is millions and millions of square miles. As I recall, it's well over 4 million square miles of territory. And without the ability to know that vessels are there, we can't enforce it. We don't have the capacity to monitor satellites, to do aerial reconnaissance missions, and so this does complement that. Now, I think it's important for us to all note that there has been reports of vessels that are misreporting their station, misreporting their location, and they're doing it to illegally fish and illegally circumvent sanctions and things along those lines. So I don't think that this amendment is going to solve all the problems, but I think it's a huge step in the right direction. I again want to thank my friend from California, Congressman Huffman, for working with us together on this bipartisan legislation, and I want to thank the Chairman DeFazio and Ranking Member Graves for working to help us include it in the Manager's Amendment. So again, support the Manager's Amendment. I appreciate everybody's cooperation on this, and yield back.
Yields back. Chair recognizes Representative Gibbs of Ohio for 5 minutes on the Manager's Amendment.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. While we call this the Coast Guard Authorization Act, it also includes numerous provisions in a wide range of topics, including the maritime transportation safety, Coast Guard personnel and operations, and various maritime law enforcement and regulatory issues. This Manager's Amendment serves to bolster the underlying bill, and I appreciate the bipartisan manner in which it came together. I commend Chair DeFazio for including bipartisan priorities, including the report on the Coast Guard's enforcement of the Jones Act and energy development on the outer continental shelf, requiring the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security to conduct forced laydown study for fast response cutters and authorizing necessary pier repairs and replacement at Station New York. I also want to echo Ranking Member Graves and thanking Mr. Young for including a provision that will allow the Coast Guard to exercise our port state authority and keep Russian vessels out of U.S. waters as the situation continues to unfold in Ukraine. I urge my colleagues to support the manager's amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Representative Mass of Florida for 5 minutes on the manager's amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank Chairman DeFazio, and I want to thank Chairman Carbajal. We spoke about this just the other night. Thank Ranking Member Graves and Ranking Member Gibbs for speaking to me about my amendment that I wanted to include in this Coast Guard Reauthorization Act. You look back in time that the work that we do, it adds up from year to year to year. And I know we're all guilty of wanting immediate gratification in the things that we work on, but sometimes it's important that we start with something and move to advance that later down the road. And this is one of those cases. Back in 2017, as a freshman member of Congress, I worked with this committee on getting the Coast Guard to conduct a study of our St. Lucie River waterway and the traffic that goes over that waterway, to include a railroad bridge. There were thousands of submissions of comments by my community in Stuart, Florida, and the Treasure Coast about what they would like to see for the management of this waterway to make sure that it is equitable, meaning fair and balanced. And the Coast Guard made, in my opinion, equitable recommendations, fair and balanced recommendations for all parties concerned. And today, this committee is recommending that my amendment move forward to direct the Coast Guard to implement the recommendations that they made back in 2018, those recommendations that they made for the St. Lucie River Railroad Bridge that would ensure, as I just stated, that boaters in my community, maritime users in my community, that they have the equitable access to our beautiful waterways of the Treasure Coast. To be specific on this amendment, it does state the Commandant of the Coast Guard shall take such actions as are necessary to implement any recommendations for the St. Lucie River Railroad Bridge made by the Coast Guard in the document titled Waterways Analysis and Management System for Intercoastal Waterway Miles 925-1005, WAMS number 07301, and published by the Coast Guard Sector Miami in 2018. This is a very big deal for our community. And in that, I just want to thank again the chairman and ranking members for their work on back in 2017 to help us get this study conducted. And now here in 2022 to have the findings of that study implemented and moved forward as actual regulation that will affect the day-to-day lives of people that want to be on the water. In that, I yield the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Representative Gonzalez-Colon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to commend the work. I wish to speak in the manager amendment for 5 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I would like to commend the work that the full committee and subcommittee chairs and ranking members and their staff, including John Rayfield and Matt Dyer, have done to come to this bipartisan Coast Guard Authorization bill. I think this demonstrates our committee's continued commitment to the Coast Guard and our service members. And as one of the country's 6 armed services, I think it's critically important that the Coast Guard has the necessary tools for long-term strategic planning, including adequate authorizations to recapitalize its fleets as this bill provides. In that sense, whether it be inspection on commercial fishing vessels in Alaska, port inspections in New Jersey, or drug and migrant interdictions around Puerto Rico, the Coast Guard has a crucial role to play and must possess the fleet it needs to accomplish all those tasks successfully. I am pleased to see that the underlying bill include my request of 6 additional fast response cutters above the overall program request of 64. And I think these ships will increase time at sea, take advantage of their size capabilities and to operate in rougher seas and more adverse conditions, and to operate at faster speeds due to improved technologies. I think these vessels can adequately help address the surging rise in drug and migrant interdictions in the Caribbean basin as well. The Department of Homeland Security and the Coast Guard reported that since 2012, the Coast Guard has interdicted more than 1,500 metric tons of cocaine in the transit zone. Calendar years from 2016 to 2019 have reported the highest numbers of tons removed, more than 842 metric tons, or 53% of the last 10 years reported. So this shows that the Coast Guard is interdicting more illegal drugs now than ever previously reported by Sector San Juan, which oversees Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and more than 1.3 million nautical square miles, and a maritime border with Venezuela. And as a result of the amount of illegal drugs in the area, Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands have been designated as a high-intensity drug trafficking areas by the Office of National Drug Control Policy. And in that sense, according to the numbers of 2020, the National Drug Threat Assessment identified that 24% of the cocaine movement from South America come through the Caribbean basin. In addition to illegal drugs, the Coast Guard is also intercepting illegal migrants in numbers not seen since 2015 or prior to that. Over the last decade, more than 29,000 migrants have been caught by the Coast Guard trying to illegally enter the United States. And while the previous 4 years show a decreased numbers of illegal migrants, Puerto Rico has already seen numerous groups of people traverse the Mona Passage from the Dominican Republic, which is just 80 miles from our island. During fiscal year 2022, the Coast Guard interdicted more than 44 illegal voyages near Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands with almost 800 Dominicans, 250 Haitians, and 14 Venezuelans. And when you see those numbers in fiscal years 2016, there were more than 1,700 interdicted. So these numbers have only continued to grow. We have a crisis on our nation's maritime border. This means that we need more assets in the Caribbean basin with the ability to respond. And my amendment, which I'm so glad that has been included in the manager amendments, simply requires that at least one of the 6 additional fast cutters above the program initial ask be used to address the search of drug and illegal immigration in the Caribbean basin. I look forward to the impact this vessel will make in all affected communities and the success that it will remove from the waters in and around Puerto Rico. My second amendment requires the Secretary of Homeland Security, in consultation with the Secretary of Transportation, to conduct a study to assess the Coast Guard fast response cutter set laid down within 120 days of enactment. And this will look at the measure readiness to be used to identify areas that lack adequate coverage and need more assets. So this amendment is in line with additional FRCs in this legislation, 6 more assets that the Coast Guard can consider how optimally used and strategically placed to achieve the mission in the service of our country. So having said that, again, I want to thank the chairs, ranking members, and staffers for working on these amendments, and thank you, and I yield.
I thank Gentlelady. Representative Malliotakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to Ranking Member Graves. I want to speak in favor of the manager's amendment, and I want to thank the chairman for including my amendment to make direct improvements to my local Coast Guard station. I want to also thank the committee staff for all their hard work in getting this legislation done. My amendment authorizes up to $1.2 million, which is necessary for construction projects and repairs to Sector New York's waterfront. Located at historic Fort Wadsworth on Staten Island, New York, the United States Coast Guard Station in my district is the largest Coast Guard operational field command on the East Coast, and it's also the busiest. It's absolutely critical to ensuring the security of New York City and our nation. Here they execute Coast Guard operations from Sandy Hook, New Jersey, north through the port of New York and New Jersey, continuing up the Hudson River to just south of Lake Champlain, and up the East River to the Long Island Sound and Connecticut border. They integrate traditional Coast Guard programs into a single command and focus on two major operational processes: prevention and response, in support of the Coast Guard's 5 fundamental roles: maritime safety, maritime security, maritime mobility, protection of natural resources, and national defense. The repairs would include repairs to concrete pier, the replacement of 2 floating piers, 2 breakwaters, an ice screen, and a seawall. I recently visited the facility, and it was stressed to me that these repairs would make a big difference and support their operation. And by authorizing these needed projects, the men and women at Coast Guard Station New York will be able to better serve our nation. And this would add to the $5 million we already delivered to improve their housing as part of the bipartisan infrastructure package, from handling search and rescue missions, conducting anti-terrorism activities, preventing human and drug trafficking, and ensuring that our goods are safely transported into our ports. The men and women of the United States Coast Guard deserve functioning infrastructure. I thank all my colleagues for their support of this amendment, and I yield back my time. Thank you.
I thank generally. Do any other members wish to be recognized to speak on the manager's amendment? Hearing none. Are there amendments to the amendment? Hearing none. If not, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay.
Aye.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. All right, now we're moving on to amendments to H.R. 6865. At this moment, the chair will recognize Representative Gibbs.
Thank you, Chair DeFazio. My amendment offer this for the citizens and entities who unknowingly purchase land or property with an abandoned or orphaned well to remove them from liability as responsible parties under the Oil Pollution Act. Under the Oil Pollution Act, if the oil spill liability trust fund is used to clean a spill and plug in an orphan oil well, the current landowners who had nothing to do with the faulty well are held financially liable and responsible for repaying the trust fund. By clarifying the liability, we are ensuring that orphan wells are addressed under principle on which the Oil Pollution Act is founded. The polluter pays. Landowners who have not profited from or participated in the operation of these wells and may not even known of their existence should not be held responsible to pay for their cleanup. They are not the polluters. If no responsible party can be found, these wells can be cleaned up with funds from the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. These funds are derived from taxes on oil paid by the oil companies. A burdensome process that assigns financial liability to an entity that had nothing to do with the activity leading to an orphan well hampers environmental cleanup. My amendment will relieve that financial liability for the entity who is not truly responsible for the orphan well. It will actually encourage more and better remediation. I give an example. 40 years ago, when I bought my first farm, after we purchased it, we discovered it had a couple of orphan wells. How we found them, there was casing coming up on the fields, and I contacted ODNR, and I learned about this process of orphan wells, and it turns out there's thousands of orphan wells in Ohio alone. And these wells were in place over 100 years ago in most cases, and they came out and they plugged them. And one of those wells, they were able to determine who was responsible, and they made that party clean up the cost of the plugging of the wells. But we had an instance lately that one of these wells actually contaminated some surface water, and that's where this Coast Guard fund got involved. And most of these orphan wells are plugged with state money, but it's really important for environmental sake to get these wells plugged, because over time that casing will erode and you'll have a possibility of contaminants coming down from the surface and contaminate the aquifer, water aquifer, or vice versa, stuff coming up from way deep and contaminate surface water, and that's what happened in this case. And so all this amendment does is really clarify who's responsible. If there's no responsible owner because these wells were abandoned, not in use for 80 to 100 plus years, the orphan well program will clean them up. But a landowner who's in many cases is completely oblivious of the abandoned wells on the property in many cases, and then something happens. But this also will help encourage landowners to come forward and report these, because there's no record of these wells on any, in the case of Ohio, in the ODNR maps, there's just no record. So that's what happened to me, and you know, we got those wells plugged, so we actually protected the environment, and that's why I think this amendment is so important. And if the Oil Well Trust Fund does get involved, then they have to make sure if there is an entity that is liable, they should pay for it. But if it's one of these wells that been in existence and not in use for decades, then the fund should take care of that and relieve any liability on a very innocent property owner. So in that case, but to keep this love fest going today, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to withdraw this amendment and hope to work forward to working with you and other colleagues to get a better understanding how this really does protect innocent landowners and people that want to do the right thing and make sure they report days when they discover these abandoned wells to get them plugged and not worry about liability, being liable for something that occurred many decades ago. So then I withdraw the amendment and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for withdrawing. I also thank him for his concern for landowners who may be unsuspecting. Unfortunately, language, I believe, at this point, as drafted, would go beyond the gentleman's intent, and I look forward to working with him further as the bill moves to the floor of the House. With that, we'd move to the next amendment, which would be Representative Larson.
No, we're going to skip him.
We're going to skip him. Okay, we're going to go to Representative Van Drew. Representative Van Drew, you're recognized for your amendment. Okay, well, I guess I don't see him, so we will move on then to Representative Perry, 531. The gentleman has an amendment at the desk.
Oh, he's across the hall.
Okay.
Do you want to recess for just a second? We'll see if we can get Larson or anyone else here. We could go to Graves.
Yep.
Oh, he just walked out? No one's here.
Okay, even though we're virtual, people are virtually not here virtually. So we will recess briefly.
To come back to the Larson amendment.
To come back to Larson.
Oh.
What?
Unless Mr. Graves.
Oh, there he is. He's back. Yep.
Can we do one of your amendments next?
You ready?
Okay.
It would be 184.
Oh, well, who do you want to go?
What?
Mr. Graves, do you want? You or Van Drew?
Well, let's go Van Drew since he's on. I think he's okay, Van Drew's back. Sorry, I had called for him before, but he was okay. We'll be back to you, Garrett. Representative Van Drew is recognized. The gentleman has an amendment at the desk.
Amendment 0.
Thank you, Chairman.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment 042 offered by Mr. Van Drew.
Okay, gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before speaking on the amendment quickly, I just wanted to be proud to note that the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2022 authorizes $120 million for the construction of new barracks at the United States Training Center, Cape May. I have secured $55 million in the FY 2022 appropriations bill for phase 1 of this project, which will move forward in 2024. The barracks recapitulation project will position Coast Guard personnel for the 21st century so that America can effectively deal with rivals like Russia and China. And I'm proud to serve my country by delivering on this project and your help as well. My amendment will require all port access routes near offshore renewable energy leases are at least 9 nautical miles to ensure maritime safety. Last week, there were over $4 billion of offshore wind leases auctioned off the coast of New Jersey and the coast of New York. Energy giants are eager to put wind turbines up as quickly as they possibly can. It is our responsibility to ensure that offshore wind development is done with careful consideration of ecological and maritime safety impacts. Once in place, the wind turbines in the maritime landscape will be there for at least 25 years, as we all know. These are decisions we have to live with for a long, long time. Before a single wind turbine goes up, we must know that they will not endanger maritime commerce. Maritime commerce in the United States is massive. The Port of New York and the Port of New Jersey handles over $175 billion in cargo every year. The maritime industry supports nearly 650,000 jobs. Maritime commerce is essential to America's economy and to national security. Maritime commerce cannot function without clear lanes for vessels to travel from port to port. These lanes must be broad enough for shipping vessels to pass by each other. The lanes also must be wide enough to provide vessels the berth to turn around in emergencies. I'm extremely concerned that the current offshore wind designs do not meet these criteria and will create a cluttered, difficult to navigate, and even dangerous maritime environment. The mass construction of wind turbines off the eastern seaboard without any consideration for the billions of dollars of commerce that flow through these waters will cause massive supply chain issues and endanger the well-being of maritime workers. The U.S. Coast Guard has the authority to designate, quote, port access routes. These routes are critical for the safety of vessels and maritime workers coming in and out of the ports of the United States. The Coast Guard has not yet implemented such lanes for traversal of offshore wind developments, as we all know. It is important for the Coast Guard to make its voice heard in this very extremely important conversation. As the agency responsible for maritime transportation safety, offshore wind is developed in a manner consistent with the safety interests of maritime users. Right now, the Coast Guard is being sidelined in the process of offshore wind development, and that's not a good thing. My amendment is designed to draw attention to this urgent issue to establish a position that offshore wind must be developed in a manner consistent with the principles of maritime transportation safety, and to empower all the Coast Guard to protect the safety of maritime users through its authority to designate port access routes and impose other design mandates related to safety. This amendment is supported by the American Waterways operators, the National Advocate for the U.S. tugboat, towboat, and barge industry. AWO has determined that 9 nautical miles transit lanes are necessary to meet the safety criteria that I established earlier. This number came directly from a quality action team that the tugboat and barge industry formed with the U.S. Coast Guard in 2015. It is a good and it is a wise policy. I urge my colleagues to speak in support of maritime safety as we build towards a solution on this issue.
I thank the gentleman.
We yield back.
Representative Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For years, Congress has directed the Coast Guard to protect the navigation rights along the Atlantic coast. They have ignored our direction and failed to implement their own recommendations. I am encouraged that the Coast Guard finally began the process, but they allowed so much time to go by that it's become increasingly difficult to impose navigation safety areas. Given it has taken 26 years and multiple pieces of legislation to get the Coast Guard to this point, I believe Mr. Van Drew's amendment is sensible to impose a 9-mile buffer around the wind energy facilities until such time as the Coast Guard can determine more reasonable safety lanes. So I urge the adoption of this amendment. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Do others wish to be heard? If not, I'll recognize myself for such time as may consume. I share the frustration over the length of time it has taken the Coast Guard as the lead entity in this interagency, designation. It involves DOD and others, EPA and others, and they should get this done. But given the capabilities, modern capabilities of maritime transportation, using GPS and other things, I believe that imposing 9 nautical miles across the entire Atlantic seaboard on these around these developments is a bit indiscriminate and potentially problematic. With that, I would oppose the amendment, but I'm hoping the Coast Guard is listening. They're getting the message that it won't be too much longer before Congress feels the need to impose its own will on this long overdue rule. So with that, do other members wish to be heard? If not, then the question would be on the amendment by Mr. Van Drew. Those in, now get ready, turn on your microphones if you're out there. Those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed will signify by saying no.
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 No, no.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. We're now moving on to which one? Which one? Okay. Representative Larson's recognized.
Amendment at the
Larson.
desk. An amendment.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment 051 revised, offered by Mr. Larson of Washington.
Okay. Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the chance to speak on this amendment, and just I'll walk through the process a little bit here. Last year, as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, the House Armed Services Committee included a much more broad amendment than the one I'm offering today, having to do with protecting marine mammals. It was an equally well thought out amendment. It was worked through the process with stakeholders and was included in the NDAA, and the full committee voted on the NDAA, came out of committee, and passed on the floor as well. So the House has already passed this. And then in the process, it went to the Senate, and the Senate itself objected to this and many other parts of the bill, but in the process of walking through the process of compromise with the Senate, because the Senate felt that they wanted to include this in their version of the Coast Guard bill this year. So my original amendment, the unrevised version, was a copy of that amendment that passed in the NDAA. Now, the original version slips over into jurisdiction in the Natural Resources Committee. So we've been working with the Natural Resources Committee to get an okay on the original version. We're not there yet, and I want to say how much I appreciate the work of the Natural Resources Committee staff, and as well as their leadership, including our colleague on this committee, Representative Westerman of Arkansas. As a result, the revised version of this amendment is scaled down to drop several provisions of the original amendment, and then those that are kept are written such that they stay strictly within the jurisdiction of the of this committee. So the 051 revised version, which we're voting on, which we'll have to vote on, again, drops several versions of the original amendment but then stays tied strictly to the jurisdiction. Therefore, the general purpose, that's some of the process to get here, the general purpose of this amendment is to recognize that marine mammals like the southern resident killer whale, like the northern right whale, and marine mammals in other waters in and around the United States face a variety of threats from human impacts such as boat strikes and habitat destruction. In the Northwest, the southern resident killer whale is also an important cultural symbol and an environmental linchpin. But this amendment does expand federal protections for marine mammals. It would include monitoring of underwater soundscapes and grants to support research and development into mammal monitoring technologies. But I do want to just note that the amendment builds on recent efforts already that agencies like the Coast Guard are doing to enhance protection. It will enhance ongoing conservation, science, and technology measures to protect and conserve marine mammals as well. So I'd ask the committee to, first off, support the revised amendment as part of the underlying bill, and to work with me and hopefully with the Natural Resources Committee as we seek to include the full version of the bill of the amendment in the version that goes to the floor of the House of Representatives. So again, we're voting on the revised version, not the original version. And with that, I'd ask for committee support and yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Do others wish to be heard on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Westerman.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to let everyone know that my friend Representative Larson and I have been in a lot of discussions and contact on this amendment, and even this morning, and I appreciate this revised amendment, which I believe is a very good faith effort to take out the Natural Resources Committee jurisdiction and the issues that we had concerns about there, because we haven't had I don't believe, the proper hearing or process, and it's definitely issues that are under the jurisdiction of the Natural Resources Committee. So we are going to work together to try to schedule a hearing in Natural Resources so that we can talk about the parts of the original amendment that were in the other committee's jurisdiction. And I have no jurisdictional issues to oppose the amendment, the revised amendment that Mr. Larson has submitted. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Do others wish to be heard? If not, I recognize myself. I support the gentleman's amendment. I appreciate him and the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee, on which I served for many years, and working out their differences on this. And hopefully the Natural Resources Committee can move forward with a hearing, and perhaps when we bring the Coast Guard bill to the floor, we can add even more protection for marine mammals from unnecessary destruction. So, with that, and hearing no one else wishing to be recognized, the question is on the amendment. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Okay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment's agreed to. With that, move to Mr. Perry. The clerk will designate.
Amendment 531 offered by Mr. Perry.
Without objection, the amendment be considered as read, and I recognize Mr. Perry for 5 minutes to speak on his amendment number 530.
I have 531, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, 531, okay. Oh, there it is, 531, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't seek to relitigate the past century of Jones Act policy and argument. Instead, this amendment simply creates an exemption for ships carrying liquefied natural gas, which is a sector of the market that the maritime industry absolutely refuses to serve despite its complete insulation from foreign competitors. And it is my contention, and it is the absolute truth and fact, that this is harming Americans and empowering our enemies. While there have been some improvements in the industry, The few Jones Act compliant LNG ships that have been produced are refueling ships. They're not transport ships, they're simply bunker barges. Anyone who conflates the two is purposely misleading the American people to protect special interests in our foreign adversaries at their constituents' expense. The failure to produce LNG transport ship, despite over a decade of record high natural gas production in the U.S., is a damning indictment of the idea that protection from competition somehow incentivizes shipbuilding. Instead, the lack of competition has created a situation where there is a $500 million differential between an Act-compliant ocean-going LNG carrier and a foreign ship. I mean, literally, the ship made in Korea is $180 million. The one that American can produce under the Act is $700 million. The truth is, the failure of the shipbuilding industry to meet this moment and produce affordable ships is the reason that American cities, territories, and states are unable to consume American LNG, and instead are literally forced to accept foreign natural gas from Russia. This absolutely, completely undermines our economic security and our national security, destroying the very basis for the Jones Act itself, as it benefits our enemies at the expense of American natural gas producers and people that want to consume it. While protecting American jobs is certainly a venerable goal that every single person on this committee supports, the failure of the industry to supply our country with the ships to meet demand kills jobs across the country, certainly in the Commonwealth that I represent, and it empowers and enriches Vladimir Putin, while it threatens the reliability of our electric grid and degrades our American economy. Now, there's been a lot of talk, especially over the last week, about standing up to Russia and the Russian economy in response to the situation in Ukraine. Here's an opportunity. Here's a chance for everybody to put their vote where their rhetoric is and stand with the American people and American workers and not Russian oligarchs enriched by self-destructive American policies that have been in place since the 1920s. The world has changed, ladies and gentlemen. The world has changed. Not trying to upend the whole thing, but for goodness sake, it's pretty obvious that the shipbuilding industry is not going to build these ships unless we do something about it. We can say all we want. We don't want Russian gas. Well, I don't know how the gas is going to get to the Northeast when we refuse. This government, this administration, refuses to allow pipelines, refuses to permit them, refuses to allow transport on rails of LNG. So it's one thing or the other. You don't get it or you buy it from Russia. Right now is your opportunity. Right now. Right here. Today. Not talking about up under the whole thing. I know some people are going to throw their hands up in the world. The skies are going to be falling. It isn't going to fall. Going to build a couple ships here, transport American LNG, and cut Russia off. That's all this is about, and nothing more. I recommend supportment of this amendment, and I yield the balance, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Do others wish to be heard on the amendment? Hearing none, I'll recognize myself at such time as I may consume. The world has changed. We used to be a great maritime nation. Now we are dependent upon foreign nations, sometimes with incompetent crews, to serve the United States and transport of our goods overseas and goods from overseas to here. And anything that degrades, diminishes the Jones Act moves us further and further away. We need to bring shipbuilding back to America, and we need to crew vessels with competent crews who are paid decently and have good working conditions. And this amendment would move us away from the potential for someday achieving that goal. We're hopefully going to begin to have U.S. vessels under the Jones Act doing the insertion of wind turbines. People say, oh, well, they can't build a ship that can do that. Well, it's being built right now. And that's because of the Jones Act. So, you know, I do not wish to diminish the Jones Act. I don't want to be dependent upon ships that are flagged in fake countries that don't exist. The last time I checked, Liberia was run by a bunch of former Coast Guard officers out of an office in Virginia somewhere, with crews that are marginally, if even, competent on ships that are not safe. And we don't want to become more dependent upon this system. It was a mistake to abandon ourselves to this rule after World War II, when we had a great shipbuilding industry, when we were a maritime nation with huge fleets. You know, this last year, the three major shipping companies made more profits in 1 year than in the last decade. Three foreign entities, conglomerates, ripped off the American people for unbelievable record profits by jacking up under the guise of pandemic and COVID and all the other things, you know, their profits to obscene levels. And to create further dependence upon this would be a disaster for the United States. With that, I yield back the balance of my time. Do other members wish to be recognized? Hearing none. What? Yeah, I know, but I'm just seeing anyone. Okay. Are there any amendments to the amendment? Hearing none. The question is on the amendment as offered by Mr. Perry, number 531. Get ready. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those,
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed will signify by saying no. No.
No.
Okay, in the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
Requested vote is recorded. The vote will be postponed until at the end of the markup. We would now move on to Representative Graves. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 184, offered by Mr. Graves of Louisiana.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to speak in favor of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is legislation, bipartisan legislation that Congressman Garamendi and I have introduced. And just for quick purposes of background, under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, vessels that are operating in the Outer Continental Shelf participating in energy activity, they have to be U.S. vessels. They have to be U.S.-built ships, they have to be U.S. flagged, they have to be U.S. crewed. The crew has to have TWIC cards, they have to be paid appropriate wages, and they have to go through annual inspections. Conversely, foreign vessels only have to get a certificate of exemption. One time, it's indefinite. They can have unlimited numbers of B-1 visas, which are visas of foreign workers on those vessels. And there's no accountability within the United States Coast Guard. As a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, according to some of the research that we've done, we found that Russia is one of the top 5 suppliers of staff or crew members for these vessels. And their vessels operating right now, today, in the United States, that have Russian crew members on these foreign vessels that are not aligned with the flag. So what our amendment does, and I want to say it again, this is bipartisan amendment with Congressman Garamendi and I. I believe Congressman Garamendi is locked down in a classified brief right now, but he's given us the permission to say that he's supportive of this. So what our amendment does is it simply tries to provide parity. I want to be very clear. It doesn't block or ban foreign vessels, but what it does is it tries to establish some degree of parity. Number one, if you're a foreign vessel, you can be a foreign vessel, but you have to get similarly certified on an annual basis. Number two, you have to have a crew that is aligned with your flag, with the flag of the vessel, just like U.S. crews. You have to have you can have visas that are 2.5 times the maximum crew of the vessel, because what we found happening, Mr. Chairman, is that folks would go get B-1 visas on a Panamanian vessel, Then they may go over, as you indicated, to a vessel flagged in Liberia, then may jump over to a vessel flagged in a different country. So it doesn't ban it, it just tries to provide some degree of parity between U.S. vessels and those from other countries. So bipartisan legislation that is offered by Congressman Garamendi and I. It does try to stick with what I believe was the original intention of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act to ensure that you had some degree of parity between U.S. Vessels and those operating in U.S. waters from other countries. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge adoption of the amendment and yield back.
I thank the gentleman, Representative Auchincloss.
Thank you, Chairman. I speak in strong opposition to this amendment. Clean energy sector is the fastest growing and fastest job producing sector in the United States. In Massachusetts, we boast a number of subsectors within the clean energy industry, solar panels, geothermal, fusion, but in my district, offshore wind has the highest potential for economic development and job creation. Massachusetts' South Coast sits on the Permian Basin of offshore wind in North America, a tremendous natural resource. And through federal, state, and local cooperation, we are harnessing that potential to create good American jobs and to power a clean energy transition. With my colleague, Representative Keating, we have funded we are working to fund the National Offshore Wind Institute to train American workers to man offshore wind vessels. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. This is an incredibly technical industry that requires extremely specific expertise. And this amendment would stop in its tracks two tremendous offshore wind projects, Vineyard and Mayflower Wind off the south coast of Massachusetts. Construction projects like Vineyard Wind rely on wind turbine installation vessels that have a 14 megawatt lifting capacity for construction, of which there are only 3 in total existence. All 3 of these ships are foreign flagged and manned with foreign workers. We're going to need more than 3 to even build the projects already permitted. We need the opportunity for offshore wind in Massachusetts to learn from foreign expertise, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is tremendous expertise for offshore wind installation with our European allies, with our Asian allies, and we should benefit from the skills transfer that American crews have to learn this trade, learn how to safely operate these vessels, and to bootstrap a tremendous economic development potential for South Coast Massachusetts. So I am in strong opposition to this amendment because it is really a direct assault on the clean energy industry. And at a time when we have seen that reliance on oil and gas and coal from despots is not just an environmental and economic liability, but a strategic one, we should be united in support of the transition to a clean energy economy here in the United States, and we should be welcoming collaboration with our foreign allies who share our values and who have valuable expertise to offer us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will.
I'd like to ask the gentleman, I have heard over and over and over again about how my friends that support renewable energy, have talked about how this is going to create economic opportunity and job creation for our constituents. I got to be honest with you. I don't have any desire to go hire Russians to come work in our waters. I don't. So I'm confused as to how the gentleman is opposed to the amendment whenever all it does is it simply requires that if it doesn't ban foreign vessels, it just says you have to have a crew that's aligned with your flag. Yield to the gentleman.
I appreciate it. And in the long run, we likely share the same aspiration. We want to see these be fully American jobs on fully American flagged vessels. In the very short term, as I said, we literally don't have the vessels in existence and we don't have the American trained crews to operate them safely, but we do have the projects in existence right now. They are permitted, they are ready to go, and we would need and benefit from the skills transfer and the collaboration with foreign trained workers. There's nothing wrong with international work on clean energy.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will.
The amendment does not prohibit foreign vessels. Why do we want to give such an advantage to foreign vessels? All we're asking for is, and this doesn't even provide a level playing field, it provides a little bit more of a level playing field by simply requiring annual inspections, by simply making sure that if you go get a B-1 visa to work in the United States, you at least have to have some accountability and be aligned back with your vessels. I'll say it again. I don't have any desire to hire Russians to do work in the United States.
And 10 years from now, I hope we end up in this scenario. But to bootstrap this industry when literally the American flag vessels don't exist is just going to strangle it in its infancy.
I'm going to say it a 16th time to my friend from Massachusetts. This bill does not ban foreign vessels. It does not.
This amendment is going to prevent the use of these vessels for lifting purposes for offshore wind production. These projects are not going to be able to put in these turbines under this amendment.
If my friend wants to keep hiring Russians, that's fine. I'm opposed, and I urge adoption of the amendment.
Well, if my friend from Louisiana wants to thwart the clean energy industry in the United States, then that's fine. Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman, yield back. Okay, I thank the gentleman. Do others wish to be heard on the amendment? Hearing none, I'll speak to the amendment. During the last reauthorization of the Coast Guard, I spent considerable time and actually sat down with the wind industry. I'm fine with wind, and the president has grand plans for offshore wind, and I hope that we can realize those plans. It's a great source, and wave energy is coming soon thereafter. But I sat down with the wind industry, and I worked to accommodate them and said, okay, until such a time as we have U.S. Insertion ships that can do insertion, then once, these things are contracted 5 years out. Doesn't take 5 years to build a ship. Let's give the opportunity and say, if there is a adequate U.S. vessel produced, then they will get preference and be covered by the Jones Act. I had an agreement with the industry, and then they stiffed us because they threw in with the oil and gas industry who were afraid that it would affect them. I'm favorable to the gentleman's amendment. At some point, we've got to bring these jobs home. We've got to rebuild our industry here in the United States of America, and I urge adoption of the amendment. Are there others who wish to be recognized?
Will the chairman
yield? No, gentleman's time has expired. Do others? I would yield to the gentleman. I still have time.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know what your conversations were with the broader industry. What I can say is that we have 2 projects that are viable in Massachusetts to bootstrap a clean energy industry that will power millions of homes, will create good jobs. There is not right now the American trained staff and vessels for this industry to get off the ground. We are going to get to a place where this is American built and American manned. We are not there yet. And to thwart it right now in the short term in favor of a long-term aspiration, I think is self-defeating.
Reclaiming my time, well, I think as the gentleman from Louisiana has explained, it's not to prohibit the use of these foreign-built ships until there is a U.S. ship, but to have the crews properly vetted and authorized to operate in U.S. waters. And that is an ongoing concern. As I mentioned earlier, I don't know who flags these, probably not Liberia, but it's like the Coast Guard or our Navy are called upon to defend the shipping and assure its safety. And yet we have countries that have no Navy and don't really exist internationally with flags of convenience, which has destroyed the U.S. maritime industry, and we are now dependent for most of our goods on 3 foreign conglomerates. It's time to reverse that trend. There may be some pain in the short term, but and I think the gentleman's amendment, it will not stop the wind industry from going forward. With that, I yield back the balance of my time. Others wish to be heard. If not, then get ready.
Mr. Chairman, would you yield for UC request?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, asking unanimous consent to include the record a letter from 100 employers in support of the amendment, which includes a number of folks from Massachusetts, Boston Towing, Qualitech Environmental, Cashman Dredging and Marine Contracting, and others. Ask this be included in the record.
Okay, without objection, the letter is included in the record. Are there amendments to the amendment? Hearing none, then we'll move to consideration of the amendment. Then those in favor of the amendment will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I request a recorded vote.
Okay, recorded vote is requested. The vote will be postponed. And with that, the clerk will designate the next amendment.
Amendment 530, offered by Mr. Perry.
Okay, the amendment is considered as read without objection, and Mr. Perry is recognized for 5 minutes on Perry 530.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the past several years, the left and radical left-leaning special interest groups have stubbornly crusaded against traditionally powered vehicles and attempted to force the American people and the federal government to adopt alternative fuel-powered vehicles, including electric vehicles, even if they're not ready, even if there's no infrastructure. They put these ambitions on full display in the doomed fiscal year 2022 House Appropriations bills by earmarking hundreds of millions of dollars to electrify the federal fleet, seeming oblivious to the not ready for prime time drawbacks of EVs compared to internal combustion engine vehicles. I mean, we might get there someday, but just stating that you're here today doesn't make it so. I mean, how would a Department of Interior-owned electric pickup truck refill miles from a charging station? I mean, people cry their eyes out around here when we talk about increasing truck weights, but they don't seem to care if the Postal Service has increased truck weights. As long as they're electric, then it's okay. We don't care how much you tear up the roads then. What about our small-town fire departments? I come from Pennsylvania. We have the greatest network of volunteer fire departments in the country, but they're not equipped to extinguish lithium-ion electric vehicle fires. Unfortunately, instead of reevaluating their electrification push, considering these challenges, the radical left want to go even further and force electric tactical vehicles. Look at it, a 40-mile row of vehicles on a road in Ukraine, which quite honestly should be a range right now. That should be a firing line right now. But Russians not clamoring for electric vehicles or charging stations on their way to the attack. Neither is anybody else, and certainly China is not either. 2019, the Government Accountability Office found that the Coast Guard maintenance backlog totaled at least $2.6 billion. $2.6 billion, of which we don't have one. We don't have one of those $2.6 billion. I know it doesn't matter in this town, but that must be addressed before we throw money at the green dystopian future envisioned by the majority. Moreover, the electrification push empowers, enriches, and emboldens our enemies in Beijing and Moscow, as they literally control the component mineral supply chains needed to produce EVs, to include slave labor and slave child labor. This amendment ensures that they don't spend funds made available by this act on unnecessary and often untested, unready, unsupported EV and EV infrastructure projects that empower and embolden and enrich our enemies and weaken the United States of America. I urge my colleagues to vote yes for this amendment, and I yield the balance.
Do others wish to be heard on the gentleman's amendment? Hearing none, I'd recognize myself. I would oppose the gentleman's amendment. This is the Coast Guard authorization. There is no focus anywhere in the bill, if read, on electric vehicles or infrastructure. I don't from just to say the Coast Guard can't acquire anything that's electric. For instance, if they're operating at an airport, a joint use airport, a lot of airports have moved to electric tugs to pull the planes as opposed to, fossil fuel fired. They're very efficient. They work well. It's a great environment for them. They couldn't do that. I don't know where else the Coast Guard might, in its discretion, decide to electrify something in a port or elsewhere, and to have this overly broad, amendment prohibiting them and only the Coast Guard, not other parts of DOD or other parts of the federal government, is, I believe, not warranted, and I would oppose the amendment.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield to that.
I thank the gentleman. I love my gentleman who offered this amendment, but this is a Coast Guard reauthorization bill. And there's one thing that I don't know how many are aware of. There is a new, I would call a new theory, or they're working on a new propulsion system for smaller watercraft. I'm talking about 200, 300 feet long, that are in our inland waters. I used to be an old tugboat man. That can be recharged by using the flywheel concept. And if you don't know what that is, look it up. It's not new, but it is electrically charged. There is no carbon emissions from the vessels themselves, and it's for mostly inland riverway tours. And it's just something I want you to keep aware of. And I respect the gentleman offering an amendment, but again, this is my 20th Coast Guard reauthorization bill, and we just want to get our Coast Guard working, so I oppose the amendment as offered.
Thank you, gentlemen, reclaiming my time. With that, yes, I would yield back the balance of my time. Mr. Graves?
Mr. Chairman, I actually have similar concerns to Mr. Perry here in regard to going down these paths that don't make sense. I think we've seen nationally what happens when we pursue energy and climate policies that haven't been thought out. I think that the limited options that the president has available to him to block Russian oil right now is unfortunate, and it's because of the lack of a cohesive, comprehensive strategy. We haven't produced minerals here in the United States, rare earths and critical minerals, so we can't pursue a domestic renewable energy strategy without dependence upon Russia, China, and others. Similarly, we can't back out of Russian oil without incredible pain in the United States because we haven't properly produced here. So I'm very sensitive to the concerns Mr. Perry has and think he makes a good point. I do want to make note, though, Mr. Chairman, that I also think that there may be some unintended consequences of the amendment, and that, as the Dean of the House, Mr. Young, just noted, there are some technologies also related to thrusters, bow thrusters and others that are electric propulsion that many vessels are pursuing, and technology there is rapidly advancing, and that's a safety issue. And so I know that nobody here has any desire for unintended consequences, but I do want to, again, commend my friend from Pennsylvania. I think that he's exactly right, that we can't pursue some of these technologies without a cohesive, rational strategy. Otherwise, we're going to continue to find ourselves in these quandaries that we're in right now in energy policy. Yield back.
Do other members wish to be recognized? Hearing none, are there amendments to the amendment? Hearing none, the question will be on the amendment as offered by Mr. Perry, number 530. Those in favor signify by saying.
Agreed. So
those what? Hello? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying nay. Nay.
No.
Opinion chair, the noes have it. Noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The clerk will designate the next amendment.
Amendment 183, offered by Mr. Graves of Louisiana.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in favor of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I intend to be brief, and I want to be clear up front that I do intend, Mr. Chair, to offer and withdraw this amendment. Mr. Chairman, the Coast Guard has indicated that they're short 400 marine inspectors right now, 400. And what's happening as a result of that lack of staffing is that the inspections that are required for vessels are being delayed. And so you have vessels that have been unable to work, that have been unable to go into the workforce because they don't have an inspection because of the shortage of workers. In port state control exams, the Coast Guard during COVID has began utilizing this risk-based approach to where they look at the risk associated with a vessel to determine the frequency of inspection. As a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, the Government Accountability Office recently, just recently released a report earlier this year on the assessment of a risk-based approach for conducting exams on vessels. And Mr. Chairman, that's sort of what our amendment is based on. Currently, a vessel received an inspection resulting in a certificate for compliance, which is valid for 24 months, 2 years. However, despite the fact that the validity of that certificate for compliance is the COC is available is valid for 2 years. They do an annual inspection, and there's, as I mentioned, not appropriate staff to actually conduct these. So what the amendment does is the amendment simply aligns the certificate of compliance with the annual inspection in those cases when there's a low risk based on the assessment of the Government Accountability Office. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to bring attention to this issue. I understand that most folks have not had the opportunity to read this recently reported Government Accountability Office report. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I did just want to bring attention to this issue, ask Mr. Chair if we could have a commitment from you and others to continue to work together as this bill advances. And with that, the knowledge that you're going to commit to me, Mr. Chair, I'm going to go ahead and ask unanimous consent that amendment number 183 be withdrawn.
Without objection, the amendment's withdrawn. I would recognize myself out of order to speak briefly. You know, I share the gentleman's concern. It's very disturbing that the Coast Guard is short so many marine inspectors, and we need to look at both why that is in terms of staffing, training, budgetary issues, and also look potentially at alternatives, as the gentleman has pointed to, and be happy to continue to work with him on this. So now the clerk will designate the next amendment.
Amendment 532, offered by Mr. Perry.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. Mr. Perry is recognized for 5 minutes to speak in favor of his amendment. Probably, is he in the ante room? Oh. Go to another committee. Okay, with that, are there other amendments? Hearing none, we will then proceed to votes on the amendments that have been where votes have been requested. First one is the amendment offered by Mr. Perry, number 531, on which the noes prevailed. Is a recorded vote still requested? Hearing none, then the amendment has failed. Now we'll move to the next recorded vote. The question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Mr. Graves, numbered 184, on which the ayes prevailed. Is a recorded vote still requested?
Yes.
Okay, then the clerk will call the roll.
Oh, can you hold on 1 second? Give me 1 second, I need to vote here.
What? What? I couldn't, what?
Mr. DeFazio. Mr. DeFazio votes aye. Mr. Graves of Missouri. Mr. Graves of Missouri votes aye. Ms. Norton?
Aye.
Ms. Norton votes aye. Mr. Young? Mr. Young votes aye. Ms. Johnson of Texas?
Johnson of Texas votes aye.
Ms. Johnson of Texas votes aye. Mr. Crawford? Mr. Larson of Washington? Mr. Gibbs? Mr. Gibbs votes aye. Mrs. Napolitano?
Aye.
Mrs. Napolitano votes aye. Mr. Webster of Florida?
Yes.
Mr. Webster of Florida votes nay. Mr. Cohen?
Mr. Cohen votes aye.
Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Massey?
I'm back with you.
Could the gentleman repeat?
Was that Mr. Massey? No? Okay, clerk, proceed.
Mr. Cirrus?
Mr. Siri votes aye.
Mr. Cirrus votes aye. Mr. Perry? Mr. Garamendi? Mr. Rodney Davis of Illinois? Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Mr. Katko? Mr. Carson?
Aye.
Mr. Carson votes aye. Mr. Babin?
Babin votes aye.
Mr. Babin votes aye. Ms. Titus?
Titus, got to get the, Titus votes aye.
Ms. Titus votes aye. Mr. Graves of Louisiana? Mr. Graves of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Maloney of New York? Mr. Rouser? Mr. Huffman?
Huffman, aye.
Mr. Huffman votes aye. Mr. Bost?
Lost, aye.
Mr. Bost votes aye. Ms. Brownlee? Mr. Weber of Texas?
Weber votes aye.
Mr. Weber of Texas votes aye. Ms. Wilson of Florida? Mr. LaMalfa?
LaMalfa, aye.
Mr. LaMalfa votes aye. Mr. Payne? Mr. Westerman?
Aye.
Mr. Westerman votes aye. Mr. Lowenthal?
Payne votes aye.
Mr. Payne?
Lowenthal votes aye. Lowenthal votes aye.
Mr. Payne votes aye, as well as Mr. Lowenthal votes aye. Mr. Mast? Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. Gallagher? Mr. Lynch?
Mr. Lynch votes aye.
Mr. Lynch votes aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Fitzpatrick votes aye.
Mr. Fitzpatrick votes aye. Mr. Carbajal?
Mr. Carbajal votes aye.
Mr. Carbajal votes aye. Ms. Gonzalez Colon?
Aye.
Ms. Gonzalez Colon votes aye. Mr. Brown of Maryland? Mr. Balderson?
Mr. Balderson votes aye.
Mr. Balderson votes aye. Mr. Malinowski? Mr. Malinowski votes aye. Mr. Stauber? Mr. Stanton?
Stanton votes aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Mr. Burchett? Mr. Allred? Mr. Allred votes aye. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota? Ms. Davids of Kansas?
Davids votes aye.
Ms. Davids of Kansas votes aye. Mr. Van Drew?
Mr. Van Drew votes yes.
Mr. Van Drew votes aye. Mr. Garcia of Illinois?
Garcia votes aye.
Mr. Garcia of Illinois votes aye. Mr. Guest?
Yes votes aye.
Mr. Guest votes aye. Mr. Delgado?
Delgado votes aye.
Mr. Delgado votes aye. Mr. Nels. Mr. Pappas.
Pappas votes aye.
Mr. Pappas votes aye. Ms. Mace. Mr. Lamb.
Lamb votes yes.
Mr. Lamb votes aye. Ms. Maliatakis.
Aye.
Ms. Maliatakis votes aye. Mr. Moulton.
Moulton, aye.
Mr. Moulton votes aye. Ms. Van Dyne. Ms. Van Dyne votes aye. Mr. Auchincloss. Mr. Auchincloss votes no. Mr. Jimenez. Ms. Bordeaux.
Bordeaux votes aye.
Ms. Bordeaux votes aye. Ms. Steele.
Bill votes aye.
Mrs. Steele votes aye. Mr. Kahele.
Mr. Kahele votes aye.
Mr. Kahele votes aye. Ms. Strickland.
Strickland votes aye.
Ms. Strickland votes aye. Miss Williams of Georgia.
Williams of Georgia votes aye.
Miss Williams of Georgia votes aye. Miss Newman.
Newman votes aye.
Miss Newman votes aye. Mr. Carter of Louisiana.
Carter votes aye.
Mr. Carter of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Crawford.
Crawford, yes.
Mr. Crawford votes aye. Mr. Larson of Washington. Mr. Massey.
Massey votes no.
Mr. Clerk?
Yes.
How is Massey recorded?
Mr. Massey has not been recorded.
Massey votes no.
Mr. Massey votes no.
Mr. Clerk? How is Davis from Illinois recorded?
Mr. Davis of Illinois is not recorded.
Mr. Davis, Illinois votes aye.
Mr. Davis of Illinois votes aye.
How is Congressman Mace recorded?
Ms. Mace is not recorded.
Mace is aye.
Ms. Mace votes aye.
Ms. Brownlee votes aye.
And Ms. Wilson votes aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh,
I
yep.
I apologize. Burchett votes aye. I was distracted. Mr. Graves was being very rude to me, talking to me while I was trying to concentrate.
He does that.
But he has his lovely daughter with him today,
Okay,
so
right.
we excuse him.
How is Stauber recorded?
Could you repeat, please?
How is Stauber?
I will, Kathy. Okay, the
Wills?
clerk will read the names of those who have not yet voted.
Mr. Larson of Washington. Mr. Perry. Mr. Garamendi. Mr. Garamendi votes aye. Oh. Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
Johnson of Georgia votes aye.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Katko. Mr. Maloney of New York.
Mr. Maloney votes aye.
Mr. Maloney of New York votes aye. Mr. Rouser.
Aye.
Mr. Rouser votes aye. Ms. Brownlee votes aye. Ms. Wilson of Florida votes aye. Mr. Mast. Mr. DeSallier.
Aye.
Mr. DeSallier votes aye. Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Brown of Maryland. Mr. Stauber.
Stauber votes aye.
Mr. Stauber votes aye. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson of South Dakota votes aye. Mr. Nels. Mr. Jimenez.
How's Mr. Webster recorded?
Mr. Webster of Florida is recorded as no.
I'm a yay.
Mr. Webster of Florida votes aye. Mr. Garamendi is recorded as aye.
Do other members wish to vote? Any other members wish to change their vote? If not, the clerk will report the tally.
On that vote, there were 58 ayes and 2 noes.
The amendment is agreed to. We will now proceed to final passage of the legislation. Those in favor of the bill as amended will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The legislation is adopted. And the question, it will now be reported favorably to the House. We now move on to H-Con Res 74, authorizing the use of the Capitol grounds for the National Peace Officers Memorial Service and the National Honor Guard Pipe Band exhibition. The clerk will report the H-Con Res 74 is considered read, and I would move to what's that? Okay. Without objection, the Committee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, Emergency Management, discharge for further consideration. H-Con Res 74, I call up the bill for consideration. With objections, first reading bills dispense with bills considered as open and read for amendment at any point. I recognize myself for a statement. I strongly support House Concurrent Resolution 74, sponsored by our colleagues, Representative Titus and Webster, who are of the Committee of Jurisdiction, and authorize the use of the Capitol grounds for the 41st Annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service, National Honor Guard and Pipe Band exhibition. Transportation Infrastructure Committee has continually approved similar resolutions in the past in order to recognize those law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty within the last year. We remain steadfast in support of our law enforcement community and the sacrifices of those who risk their lives to protect others, and look forward to both these events occurring in the middle of May. I urge the committee to join me in supporting this resolution. Do other members wish to be recognized to speak in favor of the resolution? The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Subcommittee Chair Titus and Ranking Member Webster for their leadership on this resolution. H-Con Res 74 honors our nation's fallen law enforcement officers who died in the line of duty last year with the memorial services here at the Capitol. Every day, our police officers show up to protect and to serve, keeping our families, businesses, and communities safe. Unfortunately, too many of our police officers are criticized and disparaged for doing one of the hardest, one of the most important and most dangerous jobs in the country. And it's a job that continues to get more dangerous every day. According to the New York Times, last year's murder rate was higher than at any point since 1996. Over the last decade, violent crime in U.S. cities has risen by 12%. We owe a very deep gratitude to those men and women who continue to serve despite the challenging times. So this memorial service is one small way to thank and honor the men and women who gave the ultimate sacrifice. I do support this very much, and with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his support of the resolution. I now recognize the subcommittee chair, Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your support and that of the ranking member. House Concurrent Resolution 74 authorizes the use of the Capitol grounds for the annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service and the National Honor Guard and Pipe Band exhibition. As chair of the subcommittee that oversees public buildings, it's my honor to carry this resolution along with my ranking member, Mr. Webster, on the committee. This service will be held on May the 15th, and it'll be coordinated with the architect of the Capitol along with Capitol Police. It will honor 563 officers who died in the line of duty in 2021, including 5 from my state of Nevada. Sadly, 379 of those officers passed away as a result of contracting COVID-19 while in the line of duty, remaining serving their communities. They were among the millions of frontline and essential workers who day in and day out continued to do their job, risk their lives and their families' lives to keep us all safe, whether it was treating the sick, keeping our cities and towns running, stocking grocery shelves, cooking meals, delivering products, and keeping our streets safe. We can't bring back those that we've lost, but we can honor their sacrifice and service by taking basic steps to keep ourselves safe. We honor them if we do that in their place or in their stead. The 5 officers from Nevada I would just like to acknowledge include Police Officer Jason Swanger, Nevada Highway Patrol Trooper Micah, Deputy Sheriff John King, Deputy Sheriff Don Poffenroth, and Corporal Ignacio Romero. My condolences are with the families and loved ones of these 5 public servants who died with valor and honor while serving us. And the mourning of all of those of the 563 who passed away, we want to recognize them and celebrate their lives at this year's memorial. So I urge the committee to join me in supporting this tribute to our fallen law enforcement officers, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady for her remarks. Do others wish to be recognized to speak on the resolution? Hearing none. Mr. Webster. What? Okay. Mr. Webster. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. The annual National Peace Officers Memorial event honors the law enforcement officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice. The measure authorizes the use of Capitol grounds for these events each May. These men and women who put on uniforms each day to protect our communities and families. It is critical for us to recognize police officers who are doing a tough job. To all law enforcement officers who put on the badge each day, to wear it with honor, we say thank you and we support you. This resolution is just one way we can demonstrate our support for these officers and their families and honor those who have lost their lives in the line of duty. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member for his statement and support. Do other members wish to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman.
Who is that?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lynch.
Mr. Lynch, you're recognized. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank Ms. Titus and Mr. Webster for sponsoring this. This is my family. We lost my nephew a couple of years ago. He died in a shootout with a fugitive from justice in Provo, Utah. And I have to say that this Peace Officers Memorial and this event was a salve to their heart. It really, it brought a lot of other families that had experienced similar tragedies together. And I'm just so thankful that we are setting aside the time to recognize them for their courageous service. Joe Shinners, my nephew-in-law, he left a beautiful wife and a new baby, and it just broke our hearts. And this means a lot to these families who have suffered that tremendous loss. So I just want to thank the sponsors of this resolution and all those that I'm sure will support this event. And I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Others wish to be recognized? Okay, hearing none, then the question is on the adoption and favorable reporting of H-Con Res 74 of the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The bill is approved and reported favorably to the House. Now, I ask unanimous consent that each bill ordered reported today will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute incorporating any amendments adopted without objection. So ordered. I ask unanimous consent staff be authorized to make all necessary technical clarifying conforming changes to each of the bills ordered reported today to reflect the actions of the committee without objection. So ordered. Pursuant to House Rule 22, Clause 1, I ask unanimous consent the chair or his designee to be authorized to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on the legislation adopted today or a similar measure without objection. So ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the chair, after consultation with the ranking member, has authority to strike, revise any provision of the bills ordered reported today that would cause a sequential referral to another committee or that would cause the bills or concurrent resolutions to be subject to the stupid budget rule, PAYGO, Rule 21. Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2L, members have at least 2 calendar days in which to file any supplemental, minority, additional dissenting views, legislation adopted today. Pursuant to Rule 6, the Rules Committee and Transportation Infrastructure Chair notes the presence of quorum for actions taken on all committee business today. With that, the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure has completed its business, and the committee is adjourned.